Okay, so we start, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Suzette. I'll brief you with the main points from the workshop number 1. Notes were taken by our colleague Angela Evenhuis, consultant with the International Network Against Cyber Hate, INACH. And we've structured a little bit the summary based on main challenges, a few positive developments that were shared, and recommendations. With regard to main challenges, Roma discrimination and exclusion has been taking place for centuries. Anti-Gypsyism is a centuries-old phenomenon. Anti-Gypsyism today is widespread and amplified by social media and hate speech online, which makes it even more relevant for today's discussion. The tools available to eliminate today's manifestations are inadequate. EU directives are not sufficient. European policies are not fully integrated into national and local policies in general, and that's very much the case also of anti-Gypsyism, where anti-Gypsyism has an increased recognition at the international level, in particular at EU, Council of Europe, and European Parliament, but has not yet permeated at the level, national levels. In terms of positive developments, anti-Gypsyism is now clearly on the agenda of the European institutions. It's not so much I can add to that of the OSCE for the time being, where this phenomenon of anti-Gypsyism and its range of expressions are dealt with under a more general umbrella of combating racism and discrimination, which is at the core of the mandate and tasking of the contact point for Roma and Sinti issues, which I'm leading. One example was shared by Ergo with regard to their efforts in coalition building at EU level to inform and influence EU policy post-2020. Information was shared about a EC, European Commission-led workshop that was organized on the 1st of October in Brussels, where this EU policy for national Roma integration strategies was assessed with a view to understand the pluses and minuses, the pros and cons, and to identify what is lacking, what is missing, and an overwhelming majority of participants at that workshop, Roma and non-Roma organizations, as well as representatives of the international organizations, including OSCE and Council of Europe. They've made a very strong point that anti-Gypsyism has to become a priority and a cross-cutting theme into all policies that will make the case for national Roma inclusion strategies post-2020. And as I recall from that workshop, another strong call was that the European Commission and the European institutions, they do their best to go beyond the traditional 4 areas like housing, health, employment, and education, and take into account a multi-stakeholder approach, and also the intersectionality, and in particular with regard to gender, to Romani women and Romani youth and children. In terms of recommendations, we were made aware by Anastasia Krickley that there might be a little bit of a risk or a trap with regard to policies that are considered to be one-size-fits-all solution, which is not the case. So we have to make a clear distinction with regard to this aspect, that because of the variety of situation and particularities and specificities within the Roma community as a whole at the European level, but also at the country level within the various groups, this phenomena affects them in different way, and all these aspects have to be taken into account when devising new policies and priorities. Solutions should be nationalized and sensitive to local needs. Coalition building amongst Roma organizations are very important to inform international institutions. An example was also shared with regard to ODIHR's contact point practice of bringing together Roma under the umbrella of the International Roma Contact Group to discuss among themselves about the challenges, what they think it's more important, and as a priority or a top list of priorities for the Roma community to be communicated and shared with the European institutions. Various interventions underline the importance of going beyond defining the anti-gypsies and taking it to the next step, where anti-gypsyism and its expressions must be clearly understood, acknowledged and recognized by all actors in the field. It is very important to help enhance Roma participation and representation in European institutions as a way of having a bigger impact and influence on establishing new priorities or calls for funding and funding opportunities. One participant stressed the importance of reaching out to Roma to raise the awareness of the importance of reporting online hate speech and to build capacity so that they understand how such reporting needs to be done in order to increase the number of such reports. Currently, both the annual OSCE ODIHR hate crime report as well as the Fundamental Rights Agency's EU MIDI surveys, they both suffer from severe underreporting. On one hand, on racism and discrimination in general, on the other hand, in particular in the OSCE, with regard to the hate incidents and hate motivation beyond the crimes perpetrated against Roma. In Slovakia in particular, it is rarely that Roma themselves report hate speech. So this is all in a nutshell. After my colleague here will summarize from the second workshop, you will still have the floor for further intervention, comments and observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I will give you a brief overview of what has been presented in Workshop 2, which was on the connections between offline and online anti-Gypsist violence. The session has been moderated by Javier Saiz of the Fundación Secretariado Gitano, and please excuse my possible wrong pronunciation of names. We heard 3 experts on the issue, and the first expert was Isabella Michalak, thank you, who is a researcher at INACH, and she at first gave a broader overview of regulations and actions on an international institutional level, and she, amongst others, introduced us to an initiative which was launched on the 25th of September, where 30 independent UN experts have issued an open letter on the rise of hate speech to the social media companies. And they also called on public officials and politicians to assume collective responsibility. She also looked at several studies and research and discovered that all found that there is a correlation between online and offline hate and that it leads to violence offline. She quoted, amongst others, the EMOR project, and which found proof that there is a circular relation between the root causes of hatred and bias. And she also quoted the latest Eurobarometer of 2019, which has shown that discrimination of Roma is most widespread and at 61% throughout Europe. But that there also was like some slight improvement in some of the figures compared to 2015. Anti-Gypsyism today, and especially online, is something she had found out that the perpetrators think they can get away with that if they act online, and also give a short overview of the most common slurs and stereotypes that have been found in the course of the project SCAN, where many INACH members are involved with. On the question of what to do about this, she found that the narratives are just a repetition of the old narratives that have been used to discriminate Roma, and that fake news and the decontextualization of images are a popular tool for disseminating hate against Roma, that there is a need for a European harmonization on the legal definition of hate crime and hate speech, and when she's personally being asked for action and tools, she refers to, for example, the Code of Conduct, to case law, and also the European Criminal Court. The next speaker we've heard was Jonathan Lee, who's working with the European Roma Rights Center, which is a human rights firm active in half of Europe, I would say. He has shown a map of the countries where they have representations. They are working as human rights litigators, also in the fields of online hate speech and online violence. He told us that they are litigating only very few online cases, and he also reminded us at some publicly known cases of attacks against Roma, for example, the assault on a Roma shelter outside Rome. He also referred to several framework decisions, conventions that exist on a European level, but also concluded that it's never simple to work along these regulations. And in a general view, he found that there is a real danger when online hate is being spread, and that it's very hard to detect whether it will trigger physical violence offline. Then he gave some samples of hate speech, for example, when it's been issued by officials. He mentioned especially a sample from Bulgaria, where hate speech has been issued by a high-ranking politician. He was the deputy prime minister, and he called that the Roma were becoming exceptionally insolent, and was calling for a solution to the problem. This case has been reported initially by the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee. The court, they filed a lawsuit. The court found him guilty of discrimination, but then the Supreme Court freed him from all the charges. Then he was also telling us about a case in the Ukraine where there was a series of pogroms, that there was offline violence against Roma and at least 5 attacks since April 2018, that almost every attack went hand in hand with a strong presence in social media, that there were films glorifying the attacks by right-wing groups online, and then in the end the perpetrator was only sentenced because of hooliganism, and that the hate against the minority group as a motive has not been included in the prosecution. And he also told us that this happens pretty often. Another case he was referring to was when an actress in Macedonia accused all Roma of mistreatment of animals. An equality body found her statement inappropriate and that she should apologize, but the police and the prosecutor's office did not see a case of incitement to hatred. The actress, in turn, she filed a criminal complaint against his company, against the ERRC, for accusing her with false accusations, and this also shows somehow that this is that there are great insecurities on the topic, and this can be very time-consuming to litigate in these kind of cases. What he wishes for is that there should be a rule which says that the investigators must investigate the racial motivation in case there is any hint for this. And yeah. So we heard a third speaker, who was Roxana Lorraine Witt, the head of the Department of Education and researcher at the Documentation and Cultural Center of German, Sinti and Roma. Her presentation focused on on hidden threat of white supremacism and radicalization online to Sinti and Roma. She first offered us a clarification of terms such as white supremacy, white genocide, norm, and also gave us an in-depth presentation into what is happening in the dark places of the internet. She concluded in the beginning that spoken word becomes less and less valued, that community-based codes of languages and trends born in nerd communities, gaming and comic, are kind of like taken over, that there are commonly used image boards and social media being used by radicalizing or radical groups which are like 4chan, 9gag, and Reddit. And she also found that Roma are like at the least stage in the social ranking, and that they are especially in danger of becoming a target and victim. She also gave us some samples. Just looking at the time. I think we have some time, yeah. Okay. So she, for example, gave some samples on the manifestation of the Halle shooting, that this was actually targeting many groups, and there were also some sub-forms of words being used, like the linguistic codes she introduced us to further. And for example, some people are using nicknames such as Anon, which stands for anonymous, just to give you a glimpse of how this looks like in these platforms and forums. And then she also told us that the video of the Halle shooting she could easily find even 11 hours after the shooting took place, and she found it on a platform where there were like 46 likes beneath it and only 3 dislikes, and that the dislikes haven't been because of the shooting, but because the people who gave the dislikes found that the killer had failed. And she also showed us pictures of that the whole weaponry had been assembled according to guidelines which he must have found on the internet, that he built all the weapons himself, that he used a 3D printer, and that then she gave an example of the platform Kiwi Farms, which is a platform for white supremacists where they exchange views, and that she also especially found anti-Gypsism on the platforms Reddit and Steam, which is a gamer platform, and she also has shown us some screenshots of these platforms where the common prejudices and stereotypes about Roma are being exchanged, and that there are a lot of referrals to Nazi slurs, and that the stuff is hardly being taken down. And she concludes that because of this, obviously the perpetrators feel pretty safe there. And then she also gave another example of radicalization and escalation on 4chan, where pictures of gypsies along with some bad words have been shown, and that then in the forum hate builds up against Roma, and that this is then going up to a Holocaust denial, incitement to hatred, and at the last stage the commenters are asking for the removal of gypsies, and also exclaim that Hitler, for example, wasn't doing anything wrong. As a last sample, she mentioned 9gag, which is also a platform spreading anti-Gypsist sentiments, and that it strongly plays with stereotypes, and that perpetrators are not afraid of showing even their real identity and pictures, and that in some posts you could even read that the perpetrators were cops from Germany, but also other countries, and she concluded that that they could feel simply safe because no action is being done and nothing is being removed on these platforms. She sees the following need for solutions. She said that there is obviously no monitoring of these platforms and communities, and that she also could not find any solid research about these dynamics, that there is little or no influence to the platform's policies, and little knowledge and awareness of this in general, and little to no political experience for this kind of radicalization, and also that the common counter-speech strategies don't work. So she sees that there is really a highest danger potential for physical damage. Okay, so these were my notes, and I hope I have not forgotten too much. And yeah, if you have questions on that, I think all the presenters are still here. So, or some at least. So, yeah. Okay, thank you, Suzette.
So, who do I give the microphone? Nobody? I guess you did a really good job then.
Thank you.
Applause you get.
Hello, it's me again. This time to introduce you with a kind of work, part of the kind of work that we do at the OSCE, ODIHR contact point for Roma and Sinti issues. My name is Dan Dogi, I'm from Romania. I'm a Roma myself, and I'm very happy to be here with you. I would like to thank and congratulate INACH for choosing such an important topic. I've mentioned to Suzette and to Ronald that very often organizations and even institutions, they shy away from choosing topics on Roma in general, and even more on setting topics on Roma on such hardcore issues such as anti-Gypsyism, racism and discrimination. And I'm very happy for having such a topic, because I am a strong proponent of the idea that what we see Europe-wide in terms of suffering and exclusion of Roma. It's not because of poverty, because poverty doesn't pop up from itself, from blue air. It has roots in centuries-long racism and exclusion of Roma, an experience of 5 centuries of slavery of Roma in Romania, experience of deportation of Roma from Romania to Transnistria, and deportation and extermination of Roma throughout Europe during the Second World War in many of the extermination camps of the Nazi rule. So it's very important to discuss the real issues. OSCE has recognized that at the core of the problem of Roma, or the problems that Roma are confronting, lays racism and discrimination. And that was recognized 16 years ago through a OSCE action plan on improving the situation of Roma and Sinti in the OSCE area. As early as 1990, a Copenhagen document has dedicated a specific paragraph recognizing the racism and intolerance against, at that time, even in OSCE, we were called gypsies, against gypsies. So it shows that gradually the Roma issues have gained recognition in OSCE as well as in other international organizations, and that racism and discrimination is, at least from a framework and policy framework point of view, is acknowledged and recognized. Unfortunately, there is not much progress in tackling and dealing with these issues. Although on the side of socioeconomic inclusion and so on, here and there you can hear of some good practices or good policies, but with regard to tackling racism and discrimination, not so much. So chapter 3 of the OSCE Action Plan, it's called Combating Racism and Discrimination. And as part of it, we deal with law, we deal with the police, and we deal with the media. And with regard to police, we've developed a specialized instrument, which is a police and Roma training. Because it was acknowledged that often in the interaction between police and Roma, there are gross violations of human rights on the side of the police, who's handling this relationship with a heavy hand. Often we speak of disproportionate and unjustified use of force, including of firearms, resulting in fatalities by the hand of the police and law enforcement against Roma. We speak of very rough handling of forced evictions as ordered by courts, accompanied by a whole range of violations and abuse. And therefore, we worked with a number of experts to develop an instrument, which is our training, to train forefront police officers, those that work in the field in areas where there is a significant Roma population, and throughout their routine work, they come in contact very frequently with Roma, and they need to be aware of the specific of the community, the kind of challenges that they have, to understand that there is racism, structural racism sometimes, and discrimination against these people, and they have to put things in context when they relate to Roma, and above all, to understand that policing has to be fully compliant with human rights international standards. And there is always a problem, and as a proof, you know, there is a whole list of European Court of Human Rights rulings and jurisprudence proving failure of police to deal properly with Roma. Sometimes passivity or failure to act is also an issue. And we offer this to forefront police officers, and in the meantime, where we have upgraded that course and we offer it also to the national police trainers and to trainers and professors of the police academies and police schools, so that they can organize our course independently in the national language and replicate it wherever and as frequent is necessary in their country, while we retain a role to provide technical assistance, help with evaluation, and so on. Now, this training is very comprehensive. It covers almost everything what you can think of in terms of relationship and interaction between police and Roma. And therefore, it also includes a component, a specific module on dealing with hate crime and hate incidents. And this connects to our today's discussion. Hate speech per se in OSCE is not a mandate for us because there is no specific commitment. In OSCE, unless there is a commitment, there is a ministerial council decision or an action plan or a permanent council decision that specifies very clearly that OSCE institutions and structures must deal with this and this topic, you cannot, because then states will object and say, don't raise this because we did not agree. So we have limitations in this regard. But the beauty of OSCE framework is that every single decision that is taken is a result of a consensus. So everyone agrees. So if everyone agrees that hate crime and hate incidents are a plague and we have to deal with it, then there are mandates for the OSCE institutions and structures, and there are very specific recommendations for participating states to deal with. And within this larger framework, we also try to raise awareness among the civil society and the Roma civil society and the Roma community that there are such mechanisms and instruments that they could and they should use. And here I connect back to what a lady from Slovakia said, that yes, very often we witness a lack of reporting. But some reports, they make it in this hate crime annual report of the OSCE ODIHR, although there are very few, unfortunately, as compared to the overall number of other hate crimes and hate incidents that are reported to us. There is a little bit of a disclaimer here. So the first part of this presentation offers information gathered by us, by the contact point for Roma and Sinti. It is categorized by bias motivation as assigned by us for our internal monitoring. The data should be understood as unofficial, as it only helps for our general orientation and prove and demonstrate that overall there is a very significant underreporting when it's about hate crime and hate incidents against Roma. The second part offers information from the states, as well as civil society and intergovernmental organizations, as well, categorized by bias motivation, but this time as the OSCE ODIHR has been mandated by states to report on. And actually, these are the types of categories that make it into the annual hate crime report issued by ODIHR. Hate crimes are message crimes, are criminal acts motivated by bias or prejudice towards particular groups of people, among them Roma, traveling communities, and so on. To be considered a hate crime, the offense must meet two criteria. The first is that in itself it constitutes an offense under criminal law. Secondly, that the act must have been motivated by bias, and that has to be established by the responsible authorities, starting from the lowest level, the forefront police officer, then the commanding officer, then the prosecutor, and eventually by the court with a clear decision. There is a distinction between hate crimes and hate incidents. In the OSCE, hate crimes are those that are collected by the states, recorded as such, and then reported to us as part of this reporting for the annual report on hate crimes. The hate incidents are those incidents that are reported to the OSCE by individuals or by organizations, but they do not necessarily have the same trajectory. They were not formally recorded by the responsible authorities as being hate crimes. But they are still indicative of the fact that many of the possible hate crimes, they don't make it to be recorded and reported as such because of a number of reasons. In past 5 years, the contact point for Roma and Sinti has recorded a number of 33 hate incidents against Roma and Sinti. 22 of them were of physical character. I must also say that we don't have a strong mandate in gathering information and being very proactive in doing so. So there is a huge limitation with regard to the number that we become aware of, because these are the kind of incidents that are reported to us, or sometimes somebody's forwarding a link to a mass media article that speaks about a possible incident. We take note of it, and then we assess it whether this is that has a strong element of racial or hate motivation, and then we consider it for our internal purposes and reporting. In terms of types of incidents, majority of them are within the range of physical assault. You know, clockwise you can see the share and the ratio. Physical assault, arson, police brutality, and hate speech. And then out of these 33 that we are aware of, in smaller extent are like damage against property, police bias in conducting the investigation, threats, forced eviction, and so on. This time, there's the same incidents, but in numbers. The largest share, as you can see, physical assaults 10, arson 6, police brutality as the third, and hate speech as a fourth ranking, and so on. I strongly recommend that you take the time to check the ODIHR website for this annual hate crime reports. This year, the hate crime report for 2017 will be for 2018. Sorry, will be issued in the coming weeks. In terms of types of victims, in many situations we speak of settlements which are disturbed, and you know, there are the type of interventions or attacks or mob attacks, and then the entire community is stormed and disturbed. Then you have individuals suffering from hate incidents, be them attacks or threats. Among them, very often minors, and that also happens very often during the forced evictions, where women and children and youth are particularly vulnerable, and they are treated in a very bad way. Then, as a whole, you have groups that are also suffering from attacks. And maybe the most illustrative and yet very terrible example is from Ukraine from last year, where within a time span of 2 months or so, there were 7 attacks, concerted, coordinated attacks by groups of extremists who went to the settlements and they destroyed their tents, they put fire to them, they chased people, they beat them, and eventually at the 7th attempt, one young Roma was killed, was stabbed and killed. His partner was also injured very severely, and as well as a 10-year-old boy. So very, very severe crimes, which are still now under investigation, but there are hints that this element of potential hate motivation is actually taken out from the prosecution. Despite all the evidence in the world and the fact that there is live footage that these groups posted on website boasting that they will go and deal with the gypsies, and showing actually the level of destruction and attacks they did, And still, investigation is very slow, and eventually, except the killing, with all the other attacks, there might not be people to hold accountable and brought to justice. Again, this is a different display in terms of numbers. As per victims, we have settlements. 12 settlements have suffered from attacks or threats. Then in terms of individuals, 9 of them, among them 5 minors, and so on. We will provide this information as our input for the ODIHR hate crime report, and they will have to consider what from this eventually can make it in the report. But again, this is a very small input that we can provide because there is severe underreporting. We also have from our colleagues in Tolerance and Non-Discrimination, who are the first ones to gather information from states and organizations to compile this report, we have some preliminary findings. Yeah? There has been observed a rise in reports submitted, but most importantly, the reports that were submitted by victims themselves, so not by third parties or witnesses. The total number of incidents against Roma and Sinti is 67, but this represents only 3% out of all 2018 incidents. So this is the extent that shows how much underreporting is with regard to hate crimes against Roma. If you check the media, then you will see immediately a huge discrepancy. So we all have to do better work in reaching out to people and identifying this kind of cases and report them so that they make it in these formal reports, so that there is a formal reference which gives a good ground for advocating, for putting pressure on the responsible institutions to do their job better. Most of the incidents were violent attacks. Together with threats, they resulted in 233 victims in total. This is the preliminary information of the entire hate crime report. Roughly 10% out of all 2018 victims. Out of the 233 victims, 61 of them were minors. So, while the rise in reporting incidents is of 20%, the rise in reporting number of victims is of 151. So this shows that somehow victims are more encouraged to consider that this is very important to do. As you may be familiar with the findings of the EU MIDI survey conducted by fundamental rights agencies, you could see, and those were mainly on discrimination, so not necessarily hate crime or violent attacks. You can see a very pessimistic attitude on the side of victims and of the Roma. They don't see a reason why to report, because from any direction and from throughout their whole life experience, the reality has taught them differently, that there is no point in reporting, nothing will happen. Well, if we can build such examples that reports can be followed up and they can produce some results and help diminishing the extent of hate crimes and hate incidents, and maybe more and more victims and people will be encouraged to report them. That's it with my presentation. Thank you very much for your interest. I would strongly encourage that everyone who's interested in more details can reach out to us, and we will gladly provide. As a last point, I would like to wholeheartedly commend INACH for dedicating this event in the memory of Valery Nowoszewski and the important work that he was doing for Roma and for non-Roma. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Can you hear me? Yes. So we are coming to the close, to the final presentations and opportunity for plenary discussion. I would like to invite Klara Kalibova to join me here up front. And let's again thank Dan Dogi for doing not just this presentation, but moderating at the last minute during the first workshop. This was excellent. So Klara, come on up.
Thank you.
So, we're coming to the end of a long day, and it is my great honor to introduce to you Dr. Klara Kalibova. Klara is the director of a very important organization here in the Czech Republic called In Justitia. This is an organization that focuses on working with the victims of hate crimes of all kinds, not just online hate crime, but also hate crimes that happen offline, including homicides and all kinds of horrible things. She has also been very involved in helping advise on how legislation here in the Czech Republic can be improved so that the victims of crimes get what they need when they are trying to access justice. We just heard how very often the process of attempting to access justice is not encouraging to victims, how it deters people, not just Romani people, but also people in general, from wanting to report what it is that has happened to them to the authorities. This is for structural reasons of different kinds, and I believe that Ms. Kalibova will be able to discuss with us what those are. I'm going to ask just two questions to begin, and then we'll open it up to questions from you. Previously in the workshop one, Gabi Hrabaňová mentioned the case of Radek Banga here in the Czech Republic. I'm not sure that everybody in the international community knows about this case, but I think it's a very interesting example of anti-Gypsyism, not just anti-Gypsyism, but also persecution of human rights defenders, if we can put it this way. I'm wondering if you could briefly describe this, and also what does the law on crime victims in the Czech Republic try to do for victims of crime, and what has your experience been in trying to help the victims access the protections that it affords?
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. It's been a great honor to share with you our experiences and practice in helping hate crime victims. I will be touching both of your questions in my presentation because the case of Radek Banga is a case which is often talked about, but nobody knows what was behind that and how painful struggle it was for him as a victim and for us as his counselors, because the case which started almost 3 years ago is not in the end yet. So that says something about the approach of the state to the hate crime victims' needs, because one of the described and known need is a need for a short procedure. So I will be talking about this case briefly in my presentation, but deeply, I hope. And also I will be sharing with you the law on victims' rights, because the Czech Republic is the very first European country in which the directive on victims' rights was implemented in 2013, and since then the state developed a scheme for funding, and also lots of organizations helping victims, not only hate crime victims, but victims evolved in the Czech Republic. So that's a good practice we can, as a state, share with the other European countries.
Great.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to introduce my organization. This year we celebrated 10 years anniversary in February, and we originated in 2009 as a result of violent neo-Nazi gatherings in northern Bohemia, where Roma people were targeted, and Czech neo-Nazis tried to attack them. So Justitia is a counseling center. 80% of our work is providing social and legal help to hate crime victims, and also representation in criminal and civil procedure. We believe that what hate crime victims really need is not counseling only, but representation. And I'm very sorry to say so, but there is a lack of sources for legal representation, not only national but also European-wide. European Union is not funding this strategic litigation. I, as a lawyer, deeply believe that strategic litigation is a way how to promote hate crime victims' rights, because we can report, we can publish, we can analyze, but until we have case law, we cannot do anything about hate crime victims' needs and rights. So our program for hate crime victims targets all hate crime victims, starting with national minorities, ethnic minorities, and ending with sexual minorities, people attacked because of their social status or age or health, etc. So we don't distinguish between among our clients, but I'm sorry to say, but the Roma community is the most vulnerable target group in the Czech Republic and in the Visegrad group, as I know so far as well. So basically, we really need to focus on individual cases of anti-Gypsyism, but also we need to understand the broader context of anti-Gypsyism and the roots of anti-Gypsyism. I personally believe that the perpetrators, and it will be clearly shown when I will present the case of Radek Banga, the perpetrators somehow gathered energy to hate or to behave in the prejudice way from the environment. And the environment in the Czech Republic, I'm sorry to say, but it's hostile. It's hostile not only against Roma community, but also against migrants, NGO workers, human rights defenders, but also sexual minorities and women. And the situation is worsening. Just the recent Pew research, the research of Pew Center, shows us that the attitude towards Roma, but also sexual minorities, is worsening in the Czech Republic as well as in the Central and Eastern Europe. But back to our organization, we are a counseling center. We have two branches. There is four, but we have two now. We have two branches, one in Prague and one in Brno. We have 10 counselors, lawyers and social workers, but we also have a monitoring center, and so we monitor hate crime in the Czech Republic. We publish regularly shadow reports on hate crime, also in English. And we collect data, we do that really thoroughly. So we collect data from the state and from the NGOs and from the media as well, and we double check them, and then we publish them. So our data, we believe, are quite accurate and reliable. And our third program is trainings and research, and we train mostly law enforcement agencies, the police and the state prosecutors, and also the social workers, because we believe that we really need the police and the state attorneys to understand the needs of hate crime victims in depth, and we are glad that the situation is changing in some regions, and that we really developed a cooperation with some police branches. This is actually what we provide to our clients. It's a lot. We have three pillars in our counseling. One is social counseling, one is legal counseling, and then legal representation. This is something which is possible only with the support of the state and with the funding from the state. To receive the funding from the state, we really had to prove that we are experts, and that we have that our offices are prepared to accept some clients, and that we really know what we are talking about. So this is what we do. And now I'll be speaking about hate crime in Europe, and especially in the Central Europe. So basically, why I care, or our organization cares about hate crime victims, and why they can be considered victims with special needs, is the triple effect of hate incidents on victims, community, and society. Whilst we represent victims and support individuals, we also help the community, which may fear from hate crimes, hate incidents, and we also help the society for which hate incidents are really disrupting and harmful. One interesting point here, the roots of hate laws, anti-hate laws in the Czech Republic go really backwards into 30s. So basically, we were one of the first European countries which adopted anti-hate crime laws, not because the need of individual or the recognition of need of individual protection, but because of the protection against fascism and Nazism at that time. So at that time, even at that time, the state recognized the need to protect the society from hatred and prejudice.
When it was Czechoslovakia?
Yeah, it was in 1933, so basically a long time ago. So if somebody speaks here in let's say Central Europe about some European Union influence on hate crime laws, it's not the case of the Czech Republic, because we decided that we will protect our society in 30s already. What's the problem on hate crime victims needs recognition is lack of data and underreporting. I know that you talked a lot about a need for reporting and data. I personally believe that it's important, but also I believe in storytelling. The data tells you only that somebody was victimized in that or that way. They won't tell you anything about their needs, their protection, the case law, and their pain and their struggle as well. So what we as organization do in our shadow reports is that we really put down all the narratives we gathered in a previous year and publish them to let the people know that how you feel when you become a hate crime victim. We also see in the society the increase of verbal crimes. I have to say that there is nothing like a hate speech concept in Europe. This is just verbal hate crimes. And we shouldn't accept the pressure of the concept of hate speech which comes from United States and which comes from the IT companies which try to persuade our legal environment and which tries to shift the crime into the sphere of just a speech. I will touch it in depth later on, but we really need to understand that verbal insults are crimes, and we need to demand the protection from our countries, European Union, and we need to recognize that also from the states which are not the states of the European Union, because this is the way how we can proceed further in terms of hate crime victims protection. What in our territory of the Czech Republic, also the Visegrad Group and also the Europe was really influential in later was the migration, so-called migration crisis. We saw a steep increase of hate incidents in 2015, 2016, but it never have reached a level of anti-Roma incidents. It was in-depth discussed in media, where media claimed that the target number one in Czech Republic and Hungary as well are still migrants, but it was not true. So this is the inflict of migration crisis. Yeah, what prevents hate crime victims from reaching their rights and protection is lack of political interest. It's changing. But in my country, for example, it's only the State Attorney Office, the Supreme State Attorney Office, which says that it's kind of priority for them. We need this commitment also in the police and in the Ministry of Justice. Sorry to say, I have to interrupt. It's really disturbing. I cannot focus. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I have to some data. There was we as a society tend to rely on data. Before I will share this data, I have to say that there is for hate crime, it's really significant that a great latency of data. People fear to report. There is not enough sources to monitor. There is also bias within law enforcement agencies. The law enforcement agencies are not knowledgeable enough to recognize all hate incidents, to record them. If they record them, they wouldn't investigate them as hate crimes often. So we have to rely on researches, and this is a research of the EU research from 2017, which shows the level of anti-Gypsyism in Central European countries. We won, but it's not, of course, a competition. it basically says that 56% of Roma people were harassed in previous year for their ethnic background. There was this is a recent research of Pew Center, which basically tested the attitude of our societies to Roma people. We didn't win. It was Italy actually, but we were close to. And this is also the environment where people like us have to work. I mean like us, and I mean you and me, where we have to support people, where we have to lobby on their behalf, where we have to write about their lives, where we have to lecture about anti-Gypsyism, and how provocative the theme is, and how unacceptable actually it is, maybe also understood from this graph. In the Czech Republic, just recently, the Western Bohemian University finished research within so-called socially excluded areas, basically ghettos, where Roma people are mostly living. And they asked the inhabitants of those ghettos how often they experience some type of a crime. The first line is hate crime or hate incidents. So basically people, Roma people who are dominantly present in socially excluded areas experienced hate crimes in 19%. The second crime is threat by violence, and the third crime, which reached 9%, and the third crime is a drug abuse. So from this graph, you can understand how prevalent hate crimes are in the Roma society. Yeah. Now I would like to briefly mention the other definition, which we all know about, but which is not useful for our situation, because ODIHR recognize as a hate crime something which is a crime, and then it's also motivated by hatred. I definitely disagree with this definition, because in the most of the European countries also verbal crimes are crimes, and when you take off these crimes, when you take off these crimes, the motivation from these crimes, it's no longer in the eyes of ODIHR a crime, but I believe that we shouldn't skip it. So we in the Czech Republic or in Europe, we have two approaches to hate crime protection or hate crime prosecution. And one approach is so-called, I don't know, I skipped it, but is so-called hostility model, and the second one is so-called discriminatory selection model. Most of European countries, including the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland and Hungary, have that discriminatory selection model. Why I'm speaking about that? For committing a hate crime, basically, you don't need a hate. You need to discriminate, and you need to select. So you can do that basically without any hatred, without any emotions. So, and this is something which is really crucial for the state to understand, that sometimes hate crimes or bias crimes are done of pure reasoning, of pure reason. That's especially the case for hate mongers or for people, for leaders of organized or non-organized political groups, and for initiators of hateful discussions, for example. When the law enforcement agency will understand, or until they understand that for hate crimes you really don't need hate, or don't need to hate, we wouldn't be successful in hate crime prosecution, and also we wouldn't be successful in hate crime victims protection. Okay, so this I will skip because I would like to really speak about the Radek Banga case. We are here to discuss online hatred, and in my practice, it really the prevalence of hate incidents really shifted from verbal incidents in the streets to verbal incidents in the online space. But also the approach and the willingness of the state and law enforcement agencies decreased in prosecution of those cases. It seems that when you commit a crime in the street, it's easily to understand that it's against the law than when you commit it online. I basically don't understand why it is so, because the law is all the same. But in my practice, I really see the misunderstanding of the need to protect people who are harassed online. So once again, hate speech is a crime in the Czech Republic. We have those articles in our criminal code. I didn't interpret that or translate that, but it's basically the violence against group of people which you can commit by threatening somebody because of his race, nationality, ethnicity, political views, and religion. We don't protect LGBT people, people attacked because of their age, or people attacked because of their health status. The Article 355 is a defamation of a race, ethnic group, or any other national group, and the Article 356 is incitement towards hatred, against racial group, national group, ethnic group, religious group, political group, or any other similar group. Now I will be speaking about that already mentioned case of Radek Banga, and I don't know if it's big enough.
Can you all see this? Is it big enough? Does it need to be bigger? No, it's big enough. Oh, make it bigger, someone says. So can you do that?
I don't know.
Is it clear how to do that?
Control plus.
Control plus. Try Control plus. There you go.
Okay, but this is not the one. Okay. Okay. So basically.
There we go.
Who is Radek Banga? Radek Banga is a Czech pop singer of Roma origin, and he was active and also in some social justice issues, and he has a brother who is a very well-known blogger and journalist. And Radek Banga 3 years ago in November, on the 27th of November 2016, was in Czech national contest, pop pop song contest.
Yeah,
I don't know, music contest.
Pop music contest.
Pop music contest. Thank you. And also there was a group which is called Ortel, and this group is known as a neo-Nazi group, or some of their musicians formerly played for a neo-Nazi group, Conflict 88, which was related to a neo-Nazi movement in the Czech Republic. So basically, it was already known, or people believed that this group would win some like second or third place, and Radek actually took a chance to protest against the possibility of a far-right band to be awarded. So during the ceremony, he shouted something and then left the hall, and then he wrote about his protest on Facebook, on his private but open profile. Within 2 or 3 days, he received thousands of threats. It was death threats, also threats against his family, also Holocaust denial, also very nasty words. Very few supportive, but some comments he received. So basically what he received, this is just a small excerpt from what he received. I give you a moment to read it through. I know it's painful, but I can't read it anymore. I read it on such a kind of conferences. I'm really exhausted of that. So he basically decided that he will take an action against that, and not only for himself but also for the people in similar situation, because this was not the first time where people of Roma origin were attacked online. Also his brother formerly was attacked, also lots of public Roma faces have been attacked at that time. So he submitted a criminal complaint on 7th of December 2016, and already on the 30th of December the police actually dismissed the case, saying that there was not a crime within his profile. You know, you read it, and according to the Czech police there was no crime. And but we supported him. We provided him with some information, and then we represented him as attorneys, or no, as a civil society organization, and then as attorneys. And in March 2017, the superior police actually said that there were some crimes on his profile, and they identified 20 profiles, but they never ever asked the Facebook for cooperation. So they basically didn't fill in the procedure. So basically we have been left with print screens only, and some recordings of his profile. That stuff is still on, because we prevented him to report that, because if he would report that, the Facebook would never ever give it to the police, or the police wouldn't ask for that the Facebook. So for hate crime victims, we are in a very problematic situation. And this is something we have to advise our clients, that if you want to go to the criminal procedure, if you want to if you want to protect yourself, please don't report the comments which harass you. This is really ridiculous situation, and we really need to change it. We really need the commitment of our police, not our Czech police, but our European police, and the IT companies here in active in the European Union to commit to mutual cooperation, which actually would work. So basically, I personally submitted up to 700 complaints against a procedural decision within that case. There was no single motion of the law enforcement agencies without a complaint. So this is how the Banga case should be understood, that without him as a very strong person and without us as very committed lawyers, the case would never ever end up so well. After a year, only one person was sentenced, another was accused, and one was charged out of 20. Out of 20 identified by the police. At that point, we sat down with our client and discussed whether he would like to proceed and whether he would like to fill in a criminal complaint against other people, against all those hundreds of haters. And he said, no, I don't really have the energy for that. Because what happened actually was that the law enforcement agencies split the case into various regions. That means that even though it should be according to law, the law should respect the needs of victim, and the victim should be inquired or questioned only once. It's not the case for online hate crime cases, because in that time it splits according across the region according to the place of origin of the perpetrator. So basically he was traveling to support his case across the Czech Republic. So 35 months later now, we have one sentence for a crime, we have 6 found guilty of misdemeanor, 1 case is pending, 3 cases were dismissed because it was not proven that an particular individual committed that, and we have also 1 successful constitutional complaint. Right. And we have also 700 documents in my file. Who were the perpetrators? It's really important to understand that this is people like us. It's not neo-Nazis. It's not young people. It's not people who actually lost their life. It's people who can decide that they won't hate. It's not people who should be understood though. There was, out of 20, there was 19 men, only 1 had a proven extremist affiliation, meaning that he was active neo-Nazi some time ago. The average age was 33, the youngest was 18, the oldest was 62. There was a relevantly low rate of recidivism. Only 1 was recidivist in hate crime and 3 were recidivists in a non-hate crime. They didn't feel any shame when hating online. 14 of them used their real names, and 5 of them used the names which were derived from their real names, so it was really easy to find them. Also, their defense strategy was really interesting. It was incredibly interesting. Only 1 of them, was represented by a lawyer. That means that they really didn't feel afraid of criminal procedure. Some of them were proud what they did. Some of them really seek some consonance with the law enforcement. They try to persuade the police that it's okay to say to Radek Banga that he's bloody gypsy and should be gassed. and they believed that they will impress the police officers somehow. So, but they didn't. But this was really interesting strategy. It seems that they really didn't feel that they did something wrong. And that's the problem. That's the problem of non-visibility of law and non-visibility of the judgments which we already have on hate crime online.
And it's also a big example of the social acceptance of anti-Gypsyism in general, that it's completely socially accepted. We have a question here. Can someone bring the microphone?
I'm sorry, I have no question. I have a comment on what you just said, and I'm sorry to interrupt you for this in advance. But you're saying who are the perpetrators, and you're saying there were people just like us, and I heavily have to disagree with this. The perpetrators that do these kind of hate speech actions and discrimination are not people like us, because people like us, we feel empathy, and we know that doing stuff like this is wrong. We should not deny Holocaust, we should not discriminate people. This should be common sense. So we should not act like these are people like you and me. These are people who inherit a belief and the ideas that they are superior to other beings, and for this, not only superior in the terms of having access to resources and whatever, but also superior that they can define what is normal and what is not normal, who is human, who is subhuman, and who is not to be considered human at all, and for just not to be treated human at all. And what we see here, what you have just presented to us, is people who believe that Sinti and Roma people, or Romani people, however we call us, are not to be treated as humans at all. And I think we should shift our point of view from asking only who are the victims to who are also the perpetrators. You did it very good, and we need to define who are the perpetrators in details, because this is a problematic group that all of our further actions need to target. Thank you very much.
Could I make a comment about the context of the Czech Republic that I think is important? The understanding, the prevalent understanding in the Czech Republic is that this kind of ugly behavior, which is completely ugly, is the domain only of extremists, people who are ideological neo-Nazis, etc. The understanding that this lack of empathy is actually something that, unfortunately, many people in this society share, even if they don't have a swastika tattoo, is something that people still don't realize yet. I believe that's what Clara was trying to say. In the Czech context, she was trying to say, it's the average person, sadly, who lacks the empathy that you have just described as being so very necessary. Is that correct, Clara?
Yeah, that's correct. And it's not only the Czech Republic, it's the Visegrad group countries as well. So basically, I really believe that what we here miss and what Brussels misses is the understanding that we are here in a completely different situation, that there is no common understanding that incitement to racial hatred is something wrong. And we have to face it, we have to understand it, and we have to recognize that. If we close our eyes and say, well, this is some kind of special people who actually attack Roma, I don't know, migrants, NGO workers, we gave them some special power, and we also close our eyes from the wave of hatred we are facing now. We have to target the whole society. We have to target the middle-age group. We don't need to target only children, and we don't need to target only extremists. So basically, the programs which are targeting people like neo-Nazis or far-right activists, they can work, but not in the Czech Republic. They probably work in Germany or somewhere else, but we really need to influence the society as a whole. We really need the commitment to prosecute not only subculture neo-Nazis, but also bus drivers, teachers, lawyers and doctors who actually commit crimes against the Czech law and European law as well, commit hate crimes against our law. So basically, this is what we really need to understand. Yes, please.
Yes, there's another question here.
Panayot Dimitas from Greece. I don't know why you said just Visegrad countries have exactly the same situation in Greece, and I'm not sure that it's very different in, let's say, in Italy or some other countries. Actually, in Greece you find very often well-known academics, journalists, who may be sensitive towards migrants, towards racism against migrants, and then the next comment they will say about Roma, but it is their style of life, they don't want, etc. So I don't know why you confine it in the visited countries, and I feel that actually, I do remember that one of the commissioners for human rights, first, second one, said that xenophobia, as he called it, is strong everywhere within his mandate, which is the Council of Europe, and much different. So although I have to say, by the way, and I finish, you made an excellent presentation, and especially criticizing the failures, or not the failures, the weaknesses of the definition that ODIHR and OSCE is forced to have because of the American participation in OSCE. Last week we had the same discussion in Zagreb with the person of ODIHR. So we fully agree with you, and we keep filing complaints like that in Greece. And by the way, most of our complaints go nowhere because prosecutors do share either the racist things or the fact that when this well-known liberal, quote-unquote, politician says that Islam is a crime by definition, he's just expressing his views about Islam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was another question here. There's one, and then there's two.
Good afternoon. I have a question for Mrs. Kalimová speaking. Do you have any experience with dealing with representative of Facebook or Twitter? Thank you.
I have.
What was your experience, Clara?
Misunderstanding, and actually, I don't know how to say it in English, but to be polite, but
Don't be polite. You're not.
Overprivileged, and we as an organization are a trusted flagger of Facebook, and also we took part in monitoring exercise since 2016, which regularly monitors hate speech online and the response of IT companies to delete illegal speech when it's reported. So in four times we already reported within the window of 6 weeks, within the period of 6 weeks, we reported up to 100 cases, and we tested how long will it take to IT companies to shut it down. The first exercise we participated in, it was actually the second exercise, which was organized by the European Commission, was a disaster. YouTube didn't shut down a single one reported case. Facebook, around 50%. It improved since then. It improved a lot because the European Commission put a lot of pressure on IT companies, but that's it. And they are not doing that willingly because they want to prevent hate speech online. They do that because they are afraid of some legal steps which European Commission or European Union can take against IT companies. So basically, I'm a little bit critical about our engagement in that monitoring exercise as well, because somehow the IT companies know that the reporting will take place, they are active, and then after that short-term period of time, they didn't shut it down even if you report that. So they are prepared for this monitoring exercise, and they react, and their numbers are pretty well now, and they will be better, but they are better, they are good only in that short period of time where this exercise takes place.
And the goal should be that they will change their behavior when no one is looking.
But also it's our commitment. It's us who has to say the IT companies that they are wrong, and it's INACH's work also to say them to them, to tell them that it's the problem. And so this is first thing. They get better. They effort get better, but what doesn't is attitude to hate crime victims. They don't protect hate crime victims. I represented a victim of or the relatives of a victim of a murder. A Roma guy was shot dead by 21 shots in the Czech Republic in 21st century. He was executed in front of his mother's and father's eyes. And then we were representing him or his parents in the court, and then actually a hoax about him and his family took place elsewhere in social media. And for me, it took me a month to persuade, and I'm a trusted flagger, basically. I have to have the direct line to Facebook. It took me a month to persuade the Facebook to shut it down, to protect somebody who was already dead from being called a terrorist. So yes, I have discussed these issues very thoroughly with IT companies, and yes, they don't protect people, they don't protect individuals. They do all these exercises, they do all these trainings only to persuade the public that they do care. I should be a shielded, trusted flagger. I've been negotiating with them a year to shield our Facebook page. It's not working. It's not working. I can read about myself that I'm a pervert, that I am, name it. I won't repeat that. And also my photos are changed and spread it across Facebook, and Facebook does not protect me. I wrote him a week ago again, after 4 months where they didn't reply. A week ago they didn't reply as well. I wrote them yesterday and told me, well, you have to wait to shield your profile until next week when we return from the holiday. It's really funny. I don't have this time, and I'm overprivileged. I'm doctor in criminal law. I'm an attorney. I'm white, and I do understand what I can do for myself, but there is a glass ceiling. I can't do that until somebody more powerful decides that he would do that, and I stress he would do that, because what we see here in at least Eastern Europe, or what we see here in the hate speech online, is a very increase of sexualized and gendered attack against human rights defenders.
Thank you. It's okay, Clara.
It's a Greta speech, and
I think we had one more. I think we had one more question here.
Yes, Radu Reilanu from Active Watch Romania. First of all, I want to congratulate you for your resilience, both you and Radek, in doing this. What I would like to ask you is first, what is the minimum and the maximum punishment under criminal law in the Czech Republic for hate speech? And second of all, what punishments do you hope to obtain in court, and whether this punishment is the same for all the perpetrators, or you hope to obtain different punishments for different perpetrators that you have pursued in court on this case? Thank you.
The maximum punishment for verbal hate crime is up to 3 years when it is committed online. When it is committed not online, it's 2 years. And it's for incitement, defamation, and that violence threat against a group of people. If it comes to murder or bodily injury, the sentence is shifted approximately about 1/3. But in terms of verbal crime and online crimes, it's around 2 or 3 years. We cannot, as a victim, I mean, in the Czech minimum is, there is no minimum. This is, there is no level. It's 0 to 2 years. So it's, also fine, also financial sentence. And also, public works, community service.
Being sentenced to community service.
Community service. The very first perpetrator was sentenced to community service, actually. And very conditional sentences as well. So, but we didn't aim for a particular sentence, because it's not possible for the victim to claim that. The victim in the Czech procedure, it's a part of the criminal procedure. It's a big difference from other European legislation, and therefore he can be active. Also, the constitutional complaint was about the right of Radek to be accepted as a victim, because I have it somewhere. No, never mind. He was not in one case accepted as a victim. He was treated as a victim by the police, by the state prosecutor office. He was informed about his rights, and then he was not invited to the court. So basically, I woke up in the morning, I opened the internet, and then I read that the court just started. So I freaked out that I missed something and that it would be a problem, and then I called to my client. He was, no, I don't know, there is no hearing, I didn't receive anything. So I called to the court, and they said that it probably is a mistake, but then the court actually within the hearings said, yes, you are not a victim, because and so we didn't invite you, and you don't have rights in the hearing, because they said that he was victimized by a sentence which was not directed against him. It was not like, you personally, you should be killed. It was a sentence which actually targeted Roma people as a group. All gypsies should be gassed. But it was put on his private page. So our argumentation in the constitutional complaint was that even this non-targeted sentence may disrupt it and may oppress somebody and may harass somebody, and that this should be seen by the court as something which creates a position of victim. And we want it. And the Constitutional Court actually says that it's similar, the hate speech online it's similar to hate speech which has been seen before the genocide in Second World War, that it already started by these sayings, and that the state has the obligation to recognize victims' needs, and that's the victim through which eyes the justice should see how harmful that is and how they will proceed. So this is very crucial. This is very crucial decision for the Czech Republic, because now there is an obligation of the police and also state prosecutors and the court to question the victim and to respect their understanding of hate crime.
That's what. I think that's a very positive note of a success on which we will bring this to an end. I'm sorry that we can't ask more questions, but it's time for us to wrap up. Please join me in giving Dr. Kalibova a very warm applause.
Thank you. Díky, jsem se nějak... Jo, děkuji.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy INACH decided to do this conference. If we want to get rid of online hate against Roma and Sinti, we need to be inclusive. We need to look at the PŘEIMYs, but also at the Holocaust, both horrible related genocides. But also we need to look at other hate that relates to discrimination of Roma and Sinti, of which we have seen some examples today. And not to forget the everyday normal discrimination of Roma and Sinti, which we all experience, and of course the violence and the murder. We need to address more the bad and uncaring policies of the social media industry. We see many old friends here, old friends we have not seen for a while, foremost Dan Doggy. Great to meet them again. I vividly and with much love remember our work in 2006 during the OSCE HDIM, facilitating questions from Roma and Sinti communities through our listservs and through, of course, the listservs of Valerie Novoselsky. Those questions were directed at the participating states at the HDIM, whom did not know what was happening to them. All of a sudden, thousands of Roma in Europe were asking questions and wanting to know about policy and about discrimination. Since I'm not very healthy right now, I slept part of the meeting, I have to admit it. But I've heard enough to make sure to know that also today it went very well. And I hope that we can all take care that what was discussed and concluded is taken forward. To all speakers, moderators, rapporteurs, note-takers, and facilitating staff, and of course our host Romea, INACH thanks you.